But Paro was a super smart man. And that's why he accepted and he appreciated Joseph's interpretation. There's a famine in the land of Israel, and Jacob sends his children to Egypt to buy food, to buy produce, goods for them to live with. And they come down the first time. Joseph immediately picks up, knows that they're his brothers, and they don't know him. So he immediately arrests them, separates them, asks them how their father is doing, asks them about their whole life, their other siblings. They tell him, we had one brother that's lost, we have another brother with our father. And then Joseph demands for them to bring Benjamin, to bring that other brother. They come back to Jacob. Jacob says, how can you do this to me? One son I've lost, now you want me to lose this other one? And finally Judah convinces his father that the responsibility is on him and he's going to make sure that Benjamin is brought back safe and sound. They come back to Egypt for the second time. They meet this viceroy, again not knowing that it's Joseph. And they have a conversation with him. They introduce Benjamin. He lets them all free. However, he plants his goblet, his special cup, in Benjamin's sack, and then asks everyone to return once they're by the gate of the city. And at this moment, at the beginning of this week's Parashat, Judah analyzes what's going on. And he gets up and he faces Joseph. And they have a showdown, then a little argument between the two of them, until finally Joseph is not able to anymore contain himself. And he breaks down and he tells them, Ani Yosef, ha'od avi chai. He finally tells his brothers that he is Joseph. He unveils, he takes off this mask almost and says, I'm your brother. And then he asks, is my father still alive? The Zera Shimshon asks a very famous question. The question is, what was Joseph doing by asking a question, is my father still alive? The first trip they came down, he asked. The beginning of the second trip already, he asked them, is your father still alive? How is your old father? They didn't know. No news changed. They came the second time. They were on their way out and then they were resummoned back. What new is he asking? What new news could they possibly tell him? And the second question the Zera Shimshon asks, also a very famous question, is, why does the verse continue and say that Joseph's brothers choked up and they couldn't give him an answer? Why couldn't they give him an answer? The Zera Shimshon says, he tells us the famous answer of the rest of the commentaries, that they say that Joseph was rebuking his brothers. He was rebuking them by saying, how could you do this to our father? And then they couldn't answer, obviously, because when something true is said, sometimes no words is better than saying anything. The Zera Shimshon doesn't appreciate that approach, doesn't like that approach the best. He wants to give a more optimal answer. He says that that answer is not the best reason to give in this situation, because Joseph was not seemingly, from the context of the verses, trying to rebuke his brothers, but rather to appease them, because they were not happy, they were sad, they realized they did something wrong, and he wasn't trying to put salt on the wound. He was trying to rather appease them and make them feel comfortable. With that, the Zera Shimshon gives a different answer. The Zera Shimshon answers as follows. He says, Joseph had a question. And this question is what bothered him, and he did not have an answer for. His question was that he knew that his father Jacob had divine inspiration, Ruach HaKodesh. And if Jacob had Ruach HaKodesh, why didn't he see what happened? Why didn't he know that his brothers fooled him? Why didn't he know that he was sent to Egypt and he is stuck there At least a location, at least a place. The Zera Shimshon answers by saying Joseph had a question. He had a question that he could not answer. He knew his father Jacob had Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration. And he was wondering, where was his divine inspiration? How was it that he did not know that he was kidnapped, sold as a slave, and he's in Egypt? At least a location, at least something. And to that Joseph was bothered with. And he was asking his brothers a question. Where is my father's divine inspiration? How is it possible that he does not know that it's me? How is it possible he does not know that I'm here? What Joseph did not know was that when the brothers made an oath, they came together and they all said that they are selling Joseph. There was only 9 of them there. Out of the 12 tribes, Joseph was in the pit, Benjamin was at home, and as we know, Reuven was not there. He went home to tend to his father. They were 9. They needed a minyan. They needed to come together and make a pact, an oath. They will never, ever speak about this episode again. They have Joseph. They're selling him as a slave. They will never remember anything of it. They needed a 10th. Who did they bring together? Who did they include part of their pact? God himself. God himself was part of this oath that they made. And therefore, even Jacob did not know what happened. God had to keep his side of the deal also, to show you the importance of what it means when people come together, great people such as the tribes, and they make an oath. God was not able to reveal to Jacob that Joseph was still alive and Joseph was sold to Egypt. And that he did not know. So to answer his first question, the Zera Shimshon says, do you know what he was asking by saying, is his father still alive? He was asking, does my father still have divine inspiration? And why were the brothers now embarrassed and ashamed to answer and say, no, he really doesn't? Because that would now expose them to telling Joseph the embarrassing episode that they all came together, the 9 of them, and they included God as number 10, that they will never tell anybody what happened. And that's why they could not answer him. This is one approach the Zera Shimshon gives. He also gives another approach. He goes with the more conventional route of that Joseph was really coming and giving rebuke to his brothers. And by him coming and saying, Ha'od Avichai, he was coming and rebuking them and saying, is our father still alive after everything that you've done to him? How could he still be alive? How could you be so heartless and do this? And why could they not answer? Because they were utterly embarrassed and ashamed of what they had done. The Zera Shimshon says, the Midrash tells us that Joseph and Jacob looked alike. And Joseph was coming and telling them in his rebuke, is our father still alive? Is my father still alive? Don't you see that I look like my father? Even though when I left, Joseph is saying I didn't have a beard. And now that I have a beard, maybe that's why you don't recognize me. But now the added beard actually makes me look identical to our father. How is it that you're not making the recognition? Don't you see the resemblance? And to that they couldn't answer because they were so embarrassed. They were so embarrassed that they could have never thought, how could Joseph, our little brother, be this viceroy, this acting king over Egypt? And they couldn't even realize it. With this interpretation, the Zera Shimshon explains a fascinating yet scary midrash. The midrash tells us, Oy lanu miyom adin, oy lanu miyom hatochicha. Woe to us the day of our judgment, woe to us the day that we will be rebuked. And it's obviously talking about the day of one's passing, when one passes from this world to the next, that there will be a judgment. It will be a rebuke to us for us not following in his ways. And then the Midrash brings a proof and says, Look at Joseph. Joseph, the youngest of his brothers, rebukes his older brothers, and his brothers had no answer. So too, we will have no answer when God Almighty himself is the one to rebuke us at the end of our lives for all of our misdeeds. And the Zera Shimshon asks, why is the Midrash bringing a proof from Joseph? It's good enough. Woe to us on the day of our judgment. Woe to us to the day that we are rebuked. We don't need a proof from Joseph. What is Joseph's proof that the Midrash bringing adding? And he says so cleverly, the Zera Shimshon explains and says, Joseph's brothers did not recognize Joseph even though Joseph looked almost like a twin to Jacob. He says in life, while we're living in this world, the sins that come our way and unfortunately we stumble on, sometimes are not so apparent they're a sin. We give in to it. We have different opportunities that come up and we don't stop and right away focus and analyze and recognize this is not healthy for me. This is not good for me. This is not the choice I want to make. That recognition and the comparison sometimes is not so clear to us. However, as the Talmud tells us, at the end of days, the Yetzer Hara will look to us, or at least to righteous people, as something very small, something so easy to discern and recognize and separate ourselves from. And we will be ashamed and embarrassed that we weren't able to recognize it in this life. The point of the Midrash that is bringing a proof from Joseph was because Joseph was telling his brothers, look at the resemblance. Don't make the mistake and not recognize what's going on over here. I look exactly like your father. How could you have done this? How could you have forgot? How could you not recognize me? And the Midrash, as the Zera Shimshon is explaining, is coming and telling us, at the end of days, God will show us our deeds. And we will be rebuked and embarrassed, which is an additional punishment. There's the punishment for what we've done wrong, and then there's the extra embarrassment. He will show us what we've done, and to us it will be so clear that it's wrong. And we will be so embarrassed that we gave into it. In life, we have to remember, we have to think, what's it all worth? Many of us are successful businessmen. And any time before we invest in something, we make a calculation. This is what I'm giving. This is the time, headspace, resources, and finances I'm dedicating towards something. And we analyze, what am I going to take out of it? What's the profit? What's the gains? In life, we need to stop and think, what am I getting for the things that I do? How much pleasure is it worth for me to know that the repercussions are so and so? Before a person eats something, many of us take into consideration how many calories we're taking in, sugars, energy, weakness. We take that into account. At least we're supposed to. On a deeper level, before we hit somebody, before we say something wrong, before we insult somebody, before we do something, the best would be to stop and think, what am I going to gain from this? Think like a businessman. Think like a businesswoman. Don't sell yourself short. Make your investment worth it. And if you want your investment to be worth it, you will always think, what are the results going to be? The Zera Shimshon is teaching us this week to stop and think, what's my life going to look like in a couple years from now? What's my judgment going to look like at the end of my life? Take it seriously. Take it into consideration. Joseph, along with this episode and many other episodes of the Torah, are there as lessons to teach us. He was rebuking his brothers then, but he is rebuking us now as well. It's up to us to listen to these wise words, act accordingly, and be the best Jews we can possibly be.